In this video, we're going to look at slide decks and how slide decks in Ready to Learn are used to facilitate a humanistic learning experience. First, know this. There are 4 slide decks in every unit. There's 22 units, so that means there's 88 slide decks overall in the Ready to Learn curriculum. Everything in the Ready to Learn curriculum is color coordinated, so when you see blue, you are talking about Lesson 1, green, Lesson 2, purple, Lesson 3, and dark blue is Lesson 4. This is true across all of the course resources to help you as a facilitator find resources really quickly and use those resources quickly. Now, another important thing to know is that there is a slide deck for every lesson, and that slide deck is divided into sprints because the lessons are divided into short mini lessons that we call sprints. Now, most programs are going to deliver one lesson on each day. Each lesson is about 2.5 hours in length. That means that when you open up a slide deck and you look at the slide sorter view, you will see that that one lesson, that 2.5 hour lesson, is divided into mini sprints. There may be anywhere between, 4 and maybe 13 sprints in a lesson. Not all of those sprints take the same amount of time. Some of them only may take 5 minutes. Another one only may take 3 to 7 minutes. Another one may take 25 minutes. So the number of sprints doesn't necessarily tell you anything about the lesson in terms of time. Now, the slide deck is used and is the primary tool for navigating the learner experience, both for the student and the educator. So the slide deck is designed to help the student and the teacher navigate this learning experience right here, the lesson from beginning to end. Let's look at what that means in more detail. First, it's important to understand some elements of slide decks and how they differ from what you may have seen before. Let's compare it, humanistic curriculum slide deck, to a content-centered slide deck. In content-centered slide decks, which is what most of us are accustomed to, here's what you get. You get a focus on the information, on data and information. It doesn't scaffold the learning experience, and it provides any directions for student interactions in a very general term, meaning that it might just say, students discuss this, or teacher models that. Now, in a humanistic curriculum, this is very, very different. Humanistic slide decks focus on the learning process. It focuses on what the learner is going to see, say, and do, and it's going to scaffold steps for interactions. So instead of just saying, hey, discuss this, it's going to give you questions step by step by step so that you can facilitate the best possible learning experience. It's not just going to show the content, it's going to break that content down into steps so that you can scaffold that learning experience for the learner. Your headings and your cues on the slide are there to help you as an educator. They're always focused on action base. The student will evaluate this, explore this, discover this, write this, articulate this. Those action-based cues help the educator and the learner focus on what they're supposed to do on any given slide. And then finally, just the universal design of humanistic slides are focused on cognition, which means they're going to be high imagery and low words. Here are some of the cognitive design elements that you'll see in the Ready to Learn slide decks. First of all, it organizes lessons, a 2.5 hour lesson, into sprints. Every sprint contains what we call a first word and a last word, which I'll show you here in a moment. It's going to focus on imagery and simple action-based statements about what the learner is seeing, saying, and doing. It simplifies and uses cues to help teachers and learners navigate their experience. Everything is action-based. Here's what we're going to see, say, and do. And everything is scaffolded in a sequence. And it uses cues along the way to help the learner and the teacher navigate the experience. So, a slide deck takes a lesson and divides it down into mini sprints. And then when you look at your slide sorter view, you will see those individual sprints organized and sequenced out. Now, let's talk about the sprints. Notice that here's sprint 1. Here's the very first slide in sprint 1. You'll notice that it says prepare for learning. High on imagery, low on words. An emphasis on what the learner is seeing, saying, and doing, which in this case is prepare. Sprints scaffold the learning experience, or rather the slide deck scaffolds each sprint into a sequence. Every sprint contains a first word and a last word. That first word says, hey, here's what we're going to do. And the last word says, here's what we did, and here's why this is important. So the sprints themselves are organized in a sequence to help the educator and the student focus on the learner experience. Now the slides themselves in between the first word and the last word in a sprint are going to contain a series of slides. Those slides are scaffolded. It may scaffold the learning experience, the learning process, and the content. So for example, this is a discussion sequence within a sprint. It's going to break those discussion questions down into increasingly more difficult or more engaging or more challenging discussion questions as it navigates through the sprint. Because of this, when you first open a slide deck, you may be overwhelmed by the number of slides. There may be 180 slides in a slide deck. But remember that each one of those sprints is scaffolded so that you can navigate every step of the learning process. Let's look at some of the anatomy of the sprint sequence, and then we'll talk more detail about how you can use this as an educator. Here's a sprint sequence. You'll notice that it has a sprint name that focuses on what the learner is doing. In this particular case, it was prepare for learning. There's always a first word and there's always a last word. First word to open up the learning experience and a last word to close the learning experience so learners know exactly what they were supposed to learn. The summary on that last word emphasizes the andragogical needs of relevancy and value. Why is this important to me, and how does this relate to my goals and ambitions? The anatomy of a slide. Anytime you see a slide, here's some of the things that you'll notice. You'll notice it's high on imagery. The imagery will focus on what the learner is supposed to be doing. Has few words, often in a question form base, and that your cue at the top, your heading, compare your stories. This is an action. It tells what the learner is supposed to be doing. And then on some slides, you'll have a facilitator cue. That facilitator cue tells the teacher and the learner in some cases what accompanies that learner interaction. Here are some of the facilitator cues that you might see in a Ready to Learn slide. This symbol is referring to the learner workbook. This is a mirror discussion. A mirror discussion is when you have this exact same discussion at a larger group level or a smaller group size. Group reflection, individual reflection. Anytime you see this little brain, that strategy is referring to a learning to learn strategy, and the teacher has other resources that they can use to deliver that strategy with those learners. There's another resource in this curriculum called the Cognitive Instructional Guide that takes all of the learning to learn strategies and provides more detail and depth on them to help the educator facilitate those type of activities. Anytime you see that brain in that top corner, it's referencing that document. And then finally, just another example, and there are others, discovery. Discovery is a process where the learners discover the information before they put labels on it. All these cues are here for is just to cue the educator and the learner to other resources, processes that might be relevant in that experience. Now, how do you use the slide decks? It can be overwhelming when you first look at them. First, you're going to want to pick the sprints within a lesson. Maybe you're using all of the sprints in a lesson, and if so, that's great. But if not, you're going to want to look at the sprints and determine which sprints you're going to want to use. Now, when you make those decisions, be really aware of the fact that the sprints are scaffolded for gradual release of responsibility, which means that they start out as ritualistic and, hey, everybody, welcome to the learning experience, let's start off slow, and they gradually increase in complexity, and then they start to review and take the learner back down the learning process or the learning curve. So make those decisions wisely in terms of which sprints you choose to use. And then look at those sprints. As you navigate those individual sprints, you will want to choose your experience through the slides. Perhaps if you're a master teacher and you get to a discussion sequence, maybe you want to skip 3 or 4 or 5 of those discussion questions to land on the discussion question of your choice. That's great. That's why they're there. It's a scaffolded experience. So you as an educator can make really good decisions about how you use those scaffolded experiences. However, if you're a new teacher or that's a particular content area that you want more depth on, the slides within the sprints give you a step-by-step process of the experience. It's our job as educators to choose the slides within the sprint sequence that work best for our experience and for the experience of the learners. Now, that's how you use the slides to navigate a learning experience for students. I use the slide deck in addition to the instructor guide to plan and organize the learning experience. The instructor guide just provides that general overview of each of the sprints and the learner experience. Good luck. I hope that helps you navigate the slide decks.